because humanity is imperfect and in some ways doing its best and in some way raising me. So, I think that we all need to kind of be grateful that each other exists, whether we have opposing views. Someone who does a foolish act that and if I'm sitting here going, oh, what a fool, what an idiot, that they did that for me, because in some ways their act might have shown me not to do it myself. So they gave me something. It was a gift. And I think everybody has to play a role in this great game, in this great play of life. And we should look at everybody as their role somehow serves some part of this puzzle for us.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte,
exploring the challenges of the creative call
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
Well, Evan, life's a game of choices. You make choices, you do your best, and you see where you end up. I guess really that's kind of the whole game here. And what choice to make, though? Not always easy, especially when you're caught between a couple, either really good ones or maybe ones that are caught between your values, like responsibility or maybe the dream, these types of things. I think we're faced with this stuff a lot more than we realize. And actually, I learned an interesting thing the other day. When we get older, life seems to pass us by a lot quicker. When we're young, it's like time seems to move slow. Like we seem to get a lot of life. There's a lot of experience. And then as we get older, a lot of people go, man, the years went by so quickly. Like, where did time go? So apparently the way our brains work is that when we are in a routine of doing something, when things are no longer novel, our brain goes, I don't need to remember that again. I only need to remember it once, or I need to remember the average of the 7 or 20 or 100 times this has happened. And so it kind of compresses it into almost one single memory, which is why our experience of time becomes shortened, because we're actually doing the same thing over and over, and our brain doesn't need to capture it over and over again. So the way for you to have more life in your life is to have more novel experiences as you get older, to have more new and interesting things that you do, more adventures, maybe. And so, if I can kind of parallel this back to our title, Choose Your Own Adventure, that's kind of something that I feel like at this stage in my life, I'm looking for my new adventures, and I always get caught between, is this a responsible choice as an adult? Is this smart? Am I being foolish? And when I was younger, and I think anybody who's younger, I think you should take some risks. I think you should try some stuff out and learn. But as you get older, there's certain things that, there's certain pressures in society. There's all sorts of things that go on that sometimes can make you not choose the adventure. But everything ultimately is an adventure, but they're different types of adventures, and they're not all equal, I think. And so sometimes it's hard when you look at it and you go, oh man, I want to have this amazing journey and this incredible life. And then you kind of look at what that means it might come with. And that can scare you out of this version of life you want. But then the alternative is, well, if I do the safe, conservative kind of, responsible choice, is it even worth it? Do I want to have that kind of safe, comfortable life if it means that it's just boring and monotonous and not interesting at all, even though I'll probably have more comfort? And so I think we're caught between choices of this nature all the time. Yeah. And that's something I'd like to explore maybe a little bit on this episode, but I don't know. I'll throw it back to you. What do you got for us?
Yeah, I mean, you kicked that off with a lot of really interesting things that I would love to talk about, a few of them. The first one that I just wanted to mention was that thing that you found about how our brains work on novel experiences, and it's like, it's interesting because then there can be a trap there in the sense that you become one of those just like thrill seekers who's just, constantly chasing one thing to the next. And maybe that's you're who you are as a person, and that's your thing. But there can be, that can be problematic in a way too, like thrill seekers, thrill chasers, and that can create problems in other areas of your life. And that's where I think that something where, that's that wisdom that we've all heard over and over and over again, one that we talk about a lot, but that whole thing of presence, right? And the problem of memory is that, and our good friend Alan Watts, like he has a great lecture in which I remember him talking about washing a plate, like you're doing the dishes, and he's like, and people are so many people get so angry about having to wash the dishes, and it's like but it's because you're carrying all the dishes that you've washed before with you, and you're thinking like, oh, I'm washing. It's like, as opposed to if you actually just really became present, with the plate, with the water, and wiping it and discovering it fresh and new, and because every moment actually is completely unique, but we start to run on an assumption of things, right? And that's part of the problem. And I think that one of the wisdoms about learning to become more present is that actually when we become more present, the world becomes alive again, like when we were children, and we discover the richness that's around us, and we're more, and there's just so much more for us, even as we start to get older. So that's one thing I wanted to bring into this, but also I want to touch on what you were saying in terms of, I think that there's this, it's not like an either or situation with this sort of risk responsibility. Like that's maybe an oversimplistic, duality to put to this, but I think it'll work. But that risk responsibility, interplay, because they aren't different. It's one of those sides to the same coin type of thing. They work together, and they work in a kind of harmony with each other, because I think that it can be very challenging to take certain kinds of risks if you don't have a kind of foundation underneath you. And that's definitely something I've learned about being in the creative process, and within any creative process that I've seriously engaged with any amount of time, is that like that foundation that you create is so important, but it's just a jumping off point for the spontaneous thing to occur, and the spontaneous thing we could identify, I suppose, as the risky thing, like those are the risks, but your risk is somewhat informed, and the sort of disastrousness of your risk is mitigated. The potential disastrousness of your risk is mitigated by that foundation, right? Which in some ways allows you to take the bigger risks, right? Because, it's like, what, I know I've got this foundation underneath me if this completely fucks up. So I'm going to take a huge jump, and I know that this is at least there, for me to do it. And so in many ways that a certain level of responsibility actually allows you to take greater risk. So I think that there's that component of this whole thing that I think is important to talk about, which is, they're not complete, like they're not enemies to each other. They're actually dance partners in the whole thing. And I guess the last thing I wanted to comment on though is that, but there's a problem, because like, we talk about foundations, like, well, is the foundation all you want to be living on? That's your life, is just foundation, like all the time, everywhere, never jumping off of that foundation, never leaping off of that foundation in any kind of way, exploring the space, exploring the air, exploring the, however you want to picture that, right? What is your life beyond just that thing? What is your life just beyond that comfort? You know,
Mhm.
there's got to be something. Is that really it? Is that adventure? You know, where is the adventure in your life where you give that thing a place? Because it's so important to have that, right? Like, and again, yeah, I think it's that whole yin yang thing in this whole game. So
Mhm.
that's those are my thoughts off of your thoughts to open
Yeah.
things up.
No, I think that's a really good point. I think responsibility plays a huge part in your ability to take a risk. And if you're totally irresponsible taking huge risk, I think chances are you'll end up with some bad outcomes. So I would say that, I would say that a lot of responsibility with big risks is actually more ideal, because when you take a risk too, I mean, there's this is a wide subject. We can be talking about a lot of different types of risks, but one thing that I was always encouraged to keep in mind if I ever took a risk, which feel like I'm a bit of a risk taker in my own way, but like one of the things that I always kind of was encouraged is that safety was very, very important. And not so much when I was thinking about safety for myself, but thinking about safety for others. And because if I take a risk and I hurt myself, that's one thing. But if I hurt someone else in my risk, then that's really bad. So, um, and I think also you have to. There's so many factors to consider in when we're talking about this. Who am I responsible for? If you're a parent and you want to take this big risk and you have a child that's dependent on you, for example, or family or whatever, I think that you have to really keep that in mind. I think that's a really, really important part of your decision making. And if you just decide to behave irresponsibly, who knows? You could hurt your child or you could have your child taken away from you. There's lots of things that can come from, being irresponsible with risk. So
Yeah.
it is interesting you bring this up, because I think when we started this conversation, I was looking at responsibility and risk a little bit differently. And I actually see that there is a limit in that, because I was like, do I be more responsible or do I take the risk? And it's like, well, why don't you be as responsible as you can, but then take as much risk as you can?
Yeah.
Why don't you kind of find both at the same time? And it's not one or the other. It's like, do both. Don't make them compete against each other. And how much responsibility, or let's say maybe it starts to move from responsibility into something else, like say being maybe there's a different term, like being well, I don't know, like a conservative. I don't know what the right word might be, like being safer or whatever. But like, how much of this are you willing to give up to take a little bit more of the risk? Or how much risk are you willing to give up to make sure you're a little bit more secure? Let's maybe call it security. I don't know as a term, but like, this is interesting take on it for me, because I was looking at them when we started this conversation as a little bit competing, because I always experience them that way. But I'm actually realizing that that's actually just a good way to look at risk, is like, wait a minute, I'm being irresponsible by taking this risk. And knowing that I'm being irresponsible might actually make me a better person in the world, not only for myself, but for everyone around me. Because I do think that, when we're looking at our life and I don't think, I'll just say my opinion, because I don't think that necessarily everybody will agree with this, but I don't think you should be making decisions just based on like, because it makes you happy. I don't think that's a good enough reason. And I think that people should be very, very weary of justifying their reasons for making decisions just because, well, I want to be happy. It's like, yeah, great. You want to be happy. I want to be happy. Joe Blow over there wants to be happy. You all want to be fucking happy. And if we all just do what makes us happy, we live in a really, really dark and shitty world. So,
yeah,
although I care about your happiness and I want you to be happy, I don't want you to be happy if it means you're going to steal from other people. I don't want you to be happy if it means you're going to cheat. I don't want you to be happy if it means you're going to do something unethical, immoral, toxic, damaging, whatever. And so I think when we're looking at risk in whatever it is that we're going for, and we're considering our own happiness, we need to consider that, sometimes it's not about what makes me happy. Sometimes it's about what's the right and good thing to do in this world. And not just because I want to be a good person, but because other people are in your life, and maybe other people you care about and matter. And so that matter to you. And so, you shouldn't just be careless about that, So these are things that I want to throw in, I guess, as I'm talking.
Yeah, no, they're good things to throw in.
Yeah.
I think that there is a price to pay for those things, like you're saying, like, oh, well, if I just steal from this person, then I get what I want. Or if I it's one of those things where it's like, it's all short term, like that, like these are short term things that can make you happy momentarily, but there is a kind of hell that you're creating for yourself in that situation that's not going to give you a joyful life. I think that's part of the misconception around some of what you're saying, is that like, oh, well, people will just, if they just do what's, and like, because I agree with you to a large extent, like, it's not just about doing what makes you happy, but it's also at the same time, it's like, but that actually opens the door for a bigger thing, which for me is what I would call joy. To me, I see a distinction between happiness and joy. Happiness is like a temporary emotion, right? Like it's kind of like a high point type of emotion that is fleeting. Joy is actually, to me, a state of, it's actually kind of like a baseline state of being that you can, that we can live in, that we can achieve as human beings, right? And joy is about that recognition that like, oh, if I do just these things that make me happy temporarily, just trying to connect as many of these little happy dots together as quickly and as many in a row as I can possibly do, that it's kind of like that thing of being also a thrill seeker, right? Like it's just, there's a restlessness to that, right? There's just a constant, just having to get the next thing, feeding the hungry ghost in a way, right? Like, which is just like, it's bottomless. And there's actually that's a very particular kind of suffering that a lot of us live with, right? Because it's not a particularly wise way to live, but actually when you are considerate of other people and how you are in relation to other people and to the world, it's not that you don't do things that won't bring you happiness, but that you're actually creating a state in which there's more joy, that's actually the potential joy that's there for you, right? But I want to come back around to something you said, because like, I was like, man, we could wrap up the episode right there with that thought. But when you said, it's about like, what is it, how, you took the whole thing of like, it's not either or, but it's like, what is the most responsible thing and what's the most amount of responsibility I can have here, and what's the most amount of risk I can take at the same time. I think that's a very simple way of kind of looking at a crossroads or a problem that you might be having, because it's just like, oh, okay, what are those things? And it is a give and take, right? Like there is a give and take. Like if you're taking a little bit of risk, it's gonna impede in a little bit on the responsibility factor. And if you're putting in some responsibility, it's going to impede a little bit on the risk factor. These things like both kind of are pushing in their own kind of way. But I think there's the harmony that exists within there, that and it's for everybody. There's like a different level of comfort, and there's with how much risk you're able to do or not do. But there's something I wanted that came to mind in some of this, is that in our culture you hear a lot of people and these sort of like gurus, like not like gurus as in like spiritual gurus, but like wealth and success gurus, I guess. And so many of them talk about taking risks, right? And you hear a lot of the stories about like, I had to like, I sold everything I had and I mortgaged my house, and my family was like, what are we going to eat tomorrow? But I made it work in this business, and like, that's what you got to do, and da 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 da. And, I think that there's, for that person, yeah, that was what you had to do. And that was the risk that you could take. But you can find stories of people who followed that route and just like, no, this is just what I've got to do. I've got to put it all on the line, and that's how I'm going to have this huge success. And it completely ends in a fucking calamity.
Yeah.
Right. Because you're a different person in a different scenario doing a different thing, like it's, I think that's one of the problems with some of like our culture around risk, is that, and again, because that's almost saying like, no, it's like it's all risk all the time. It's like, I promise you that person isn't all risk all the time. Mm-hmm. Like they took a big risk at one point in time. I promise you now, though, that a lot of the decisions that they make, they're not doing that shit all the time. They don't continue to just put everything that they've attained and built on the line every single time they're doing a new venture, because that's stupid, right? I think that where the wisdom of that comes along for a lot of people is that I think that a lot of people have become so risk averse, so afraid of risk that there's almost no risk ever taken at all, right? And so the idea is just, sometimes you got to swing a little bit hard the other way in order to find some balance. But I guess part of the problem there is that, all right, maybe you take a big swing and it ends up really crashing in on you, and then that might just make you more risk averse, more mm-hmm. afraid of it than you were before, and so now it's even less likely. So that's where I really love this thing that you said about what's the most amount of, what's the most amount of responsibility I can have in this situation, and what's the most amount of risk that I can also do in this moment as well, right? And I think that can really help us start to come up with some ideas, plans, ways of figuring out, our course of action, mm-hmm. I guess, because yeah, like it we're presenting ourselves with both sides of the thing. We're creating room for both of them, mm-hmm. right? Not saying like, no, I've got to do the responsible thing, or no, I've got to take the risk. It's like, no. Like, we're creating space for both of these things right now. Mm-hmm. Right. And they'll both present their case. They'll both present their case to you. And it's like, okay. And sometimes it's going to be like, all right, we're going to lean a little bit more responsible this time, but that doesn't mean we're not throwing a little something out there, like we're still throwing a bit of a line out there for a bit of risk at the moment. Right. And then there's going to be other times when it's just like, okay, no, we're taking a bigger swing at this one. Right. Mm-hmm. We're taking it, and the responsibility is going to have a smaller part, but it's never an either or situation. It's always an and situation.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, there's a lot of stuff coming up for me. So a word that kind of popped into my mind with all of this was sacrifice, and something that I think that when we're talking about risk and we're talking about anything we're going for, we need to really kind of navigate that word sacrifice. Like there's that, I sacrifice so much for you. It's like, no, come on. Like that's the game. That's how this works. That you chose to do this thing. That's the sacrifice that you chose to make. I mean, there's like if you put time and energy into some business and it doesn't work out, it's like, look, the sacrifice you made was a part of trying to make this thing work. I mean, that's a part of it. Raising a kid, same thing. Oh, I sacrificed so much for you. You chose to have a kid. You know what I mean? Yeah. There's choices you might not have liked that you could have made otherwise. But the thing is, at the end of the day, there you are. And you responsibility is one of those interesting things, because responsibility comes with this other side of things. Is if you want any power in this life, if you want any sense of control over your any aspect of your life, you need to take responsibility for as much as you possibly can. And you shouldn't take responsibility for things that, are not truly your responsibility to take, not because you shouldn't want to, because you should always want to, but because you don't want to ever take responsibility away from someone else and disempower them as a good fucking teammate. You know what I mean? But, as a player of sports at a high division, one thing you learn in sports is that when your teammate makes a mistake, fucks up, gets out of position, gets beat, whatever happens, if someone needs to pick up the slack for them and it falls on you, take responsibility for picking up. Don't blame them. Don't sit around going, oh, they messed up. Look, they did what they did. It happened. Now you're here. And that's part of what you're talking about with presence too. Presence is about, okay, I happen to be here. The responsibility falls on me. I didn't want it to, but it is. Here I am. Take responsibility and just do your part. And, I understand the other aspect of this, where sometimes we feel like people aren't doing their job. And so we're picking up the slack for them. And then they are riding on the fact that we'll just pick it up for them all the time. And I get that side of things. In that respect, you're totally, it's totally okay to acknowledge that and be annoyed with that and have those feelings about that. But take responsibility over what you're going to do about it. Don't complain about it. The responsible choice now is draw a boundary with that person. Hey, listen, you keep fucking dropping the ball on your work over here. And when you drop it, I'm picking it up for you. I'm just going to let you know that if you continue to do this, there's going to be a day where I don't pick it up for you. So I need you to do your job, because I'm not here. I'm helping you and I'm picking up the ball for you, but I'm letting you know because what it's causing me. And you let them know how it makes you feel. You let them know what's happening. You let them know, because a lot of the time when people drop the ball, here's the other thing. Risk takers often drop the ball somewhere. They don't realize they've taken a risk and left something on someone else. So if you're a risk taker and someone comes to you and says, hey man, you took this risk and it fell on me, you need to like acknowledge that. That's a part of the, because I get that there's lots of people out there that don't give a shit whether they're a good person or not. They're totally embracing their ego and their scoundrel side. I get that. I get that they don't care. And when I talk about being a good person, being ethical, being moral, they like tune right the fuck out and they don't even listen to anything I have to say. They're like, oh, Brandon talking about being a good person. Like they literally, I know that's how they think. I know there are people like that, and they're narcissistic and they're involved in their own fucking world. And listen, if you're not like that, we all have to navigate a world with narcissistic people who don't give a fuck about being a good person. They don't care. They're not going to play by the rules. They're going to cheat. They're going to steal. They're going to do what they're going to do. And as we go through this world, we need to recognize that we are dealing with people that are like that. And as we take our risks, we need to take our risks with acknowledgement that not everybody's going to play by the rules. Not everybody's going to be good. Not everybody's going to be ethical. And don't assume that everybody will just because they should. So you go into the water knowing they're sharks. In some ways you look at these people. I mean, look, we can talk all day about, are they good, bad? Are they, whatever. They exist. And the thing is like, they'll take advantage of you if you give them the opportunity. So, it's that kind of what was that saying you said? Like, it's like a saying from, it's like trust in Allah, but tie up your horse kind of thing.
Oh yeah, but tie your camel.
Tie your camel.
Yeah, trust in Allah, but tie your camel.
Okay,
yeah,
so it's a good example, right? Trust in God, but tie up your camel. Whatever you want to look at it, right? However you want to phrase that. Trust in the universe, tie up your camel. However, whatever your wordage is, right? But the point is that
lock your car.
Yeah, just because you have faith in things. Just because you're doing good, you're doing well, doesn't mean that you're not living in a world that will take what you gain, take your opportunity, all of that. So, so I think one of the interesting things is like, yeah, sometimes we get kind of screwed over, but we have to acknowledge that we put ourselves in a position to get screwed over. And one thing I struggle with, and this is a final note I'll say before I pass it on to you, Evan, this is something I struggle a lot with risk taking, is being the fool. Because I've been the fool a number of times. I've been the victor and the wonderful benefiter of risk many times, but I've also been the fool equally, at least as many times, if not more. And the fool sucks and it's embarrassing. And, but anyway, I feel like that's a very important part of this, because sometimes you're like, oh man, I should have been more responsible and I was a fool. Right. But being a fool is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think we need to talk about it.
Hey everybody, this is Evan, and this episode is brought to you by my book. Yes, I recently released a book called The Actor's Awakening, Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Expand yourself as an actor and your craft through a spiritual perspective. Take a journey that will explore universal philosophies and insights to help you understand human nature in a profound way, and develop practices to take your work to another level. Again, that's The Actor's Awakening, Connecting Spirituality to Craft, available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon. And as always, if you like the show, please subscribe. Being a fool is often one of the best and fastest paths to wisdom.
Yeah.
It's better than playing it safe. Playing it safe, you don't, you never really learn anything. Not really. Everything just kind of becomes theoretical knowledge. The fool is constantly doing things, and sometimes, foolishly doing those things, but you can become really truly wise, because it's not just you don't just know things as concepts. You know things through actual lived experience of things. And that is a kind of knowledge that is like it hardwires itself into you, right? As opposed to just something that's sort of floating around, and you will eventually become burned that way too, and you'll realize that you were a fool for thinking that you could not be fooled in a way, I guess. And
I love that you're a fool for thinking you can't be fooled, because I do this one little thing I want to say. I think that the people that discover they're foolish or discover they're fools put themselves in a position to expose how foolish we all are. Because really, the people who never find out that they're a fool usually never take any risks and never take any chance. But if they had, they'd realize they were a fool too. And the judgment, I think, around, oh, this person's a fool and that person's not, is part of the problem with our risk-taking kind of understanding. I think that we're all fools. It's just that some of us actually test whether we are or not, and we take chances, which sometimes expose that you just don't know.
Brandon, I'm sure you've heard this, but one of the first things that an actor learns, like a serious actor learns, it's a wisdom, it's a lesson, it's don't be afraid to make a fool of yourself, because you'll never be a good actor if you're afraid to make a fool of yourself. You just you just won't. Like you'll be just stuck in a little box, and that's so true. From the many things I've learned early as an actor, of things that have held up and not, like, that's there's a reason why that's still shot out there all the time. It's because people who are too caught up with their image and how they're going to look, you won't be able to act. You won't be able to go to the places that you need to go to in order to do your job as an actor. So, there's a thing where, we hate feeling like the fool. We don't want that to happen, but I think we need to have room for that, because we're all going to be made fools, whether somebody else is aware of it or if it's just ourselves aware of it. We're going to make fools of ourselves many, many times in our life. But the fool, again, I think is crucial in us becoming wise human beings. Like it's another one of those, I think they seem like they're opposites, but they're actually in a dance with each other. The wise man and the fool are playing around with each other all the time. And I mean, if you read, like, pick up a book of the poetry of Rumi, who is one of my absolute favorite writers and poets. Like, just how many of his poems, and this is a dude who he was a truly genuine one of like the figures in history who was a truly enlightened cat man, like on this who existed. And so much of his poems are about like, make a fool of yourself, throw your image out, like be a disgrace. Like these are the kinds of words that he uses, which is, and he uses it with such abandon that it's just like, this is where your freedom is. Your freedom is in being a fool and in abandoning your ideas of of the human being that you think you're supposed to be, right? Be a fool and become truly wise. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking we don't really have much of a great mentorship kind of system in our culture these days, at least not in Western culture. I mean, we have our parents, and then our parents do their best, and all our parents are coming from different places, and they made different choices, and they did their best, whatever they did, and whoever our parents were, whether we like them or we don't like them. I mean, they did what they did, and we're here. And so, I've done a lot of work around parental stuff, and my relationship with my parents is not perfect, but I'm super grateful for my parents, and I'll always love them no matter what. And in some ways, I'm learning through my parents to love all of humanity, because humanity is imperfect and in some ways doing its best, and in some way raising me. So, I think that we all need to kind of be grateful that each other exists, whether we have opposing views. Someone who does a foolish act and if I'm sitting here going, oh, what a fool, what an idiot, that they did that for me, because in some ways their act might have shown me not to do it myself. So they gave me something. It was a gift. And I think everybody has to play a role in this great game, in this great play of life. And we should look at everybody as their role somehow serves some part of this puzzle for us. And whether we've seen that role be played over 100 times and we watch the 100th person play the fool, and then we think, oh man, hadn't you seen the first person play the fool? How foolish are you? And it's like, well, no, they didn't, because they made the fool's role again, right? And look, I've probably made foolish choices that 1,000, 100,000, million people have made before me. And I've probably done it somewhere, I'm sure. And so I know I didn't get the memo that was a foolish act, but I did it. And there I am in the fool's role. And so I think when you look at the wise person, the best thing you can do when you heal your wounds of discovering you're a fool, because it's embarrassing and there's all the shame and ego issues that come with that. But when you heal it, you become wise. The best thing you can possibly do is share that with someone else and say, hey, look, I was a fool. Here's what I did. Now I'm wise because I did this foolish thing. You be wise too. Don't do the fool thing. And the person goes, thank you. Great, I won't. And then they go off and do something else foolish that you didn't do.
Yeah.
And they will teach with wisdom what their foolish act was. And that's what mentorship is. Like, a lot of people look at a mentor and they go, oh man, they've helped me out so much. They're so great. But it's like, mostly your mentor made a lot of foolish choices and thought, you know what? I'd like to not mentors are interesting, because mentors come in many different forms, and they show up in many different ways, and they're not all perfect, by the way. They're not all just like gurus sitting on a mountain, totally zen and like enlightened. Some of them are really fucked up people that just have some good insights. But that being said, I'm not blanketing the term mentor as somehow some good person either. But if you find mentors in certain areas of your life, sometimes a mentor might just be good for one area of your life, not every area. But usually the mentor is able to acknowledge where they were foolish. And whether they admit it to you or not, a lot of their wisdom comes from how they made a mistake somewhere, and how they learned something, and most most of these really great lessons, if they're our own, they come the hard way, you know. Usually if they come the easy way, they're someone else that we kind of pass it on to, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a lot of lessons to teach yourself that are your own, there's a lot of foolish probably choices and acts that you made, right? So but hey, I mean, I don't know, like I'm really learning to heal the wound of the fool, because I think that it's one of those concepts in this society where sometimes you think somehow you were foolish, and somehow that lowered you or made you less than. And and it's not true, but it feels that way at times, especially when you're in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just I'm it's so interesting thinking about like all of this, like, and it's interesting that this conversation about choose your own adventure has become a conversation about being the fool.
Yeah.
Because I think it's like, I saw this quote recently. It was something like, an expert is simply a person who has made all the mistakes you can make in a particular area.
Yeah.
True. And it's just like, yeah. And a fool person was a fool over and over and over and over again, until they became the expert in the field, right? Because they stepped out there and they did it. And I also, what comes to mind as well is comedians, and, or even just like comedy writers, anyone who's involved with comedy, have taken foolishness to a professional level. Mm-hmm. It's their job to be fools, right? To make fools of themselves, to make fools of all of us, to make fools of, just like that's their job, is to be foolish, mm-hmm. right? But again, a great comedian gives us incredible insight through their foolishness, by making fun of things, by shining a certain kind of light, angle, perspective on something and making us laugh about it. Like, we actually can understand something more deeply and more profoundly about ourselves and each other and our society, our culture, whatever it is that they're commenting on. There's again, wisdom. And so this is really fascinating to me, that this conversation is really pointing out a lot of this, a couple of these dichotomies, right? Like foolishness and wisdom, and risk and responsibility. There seem to be these things that are kind of coming up here. You want?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say something in regards to choose your own adventure. Something that kind of came up for me is like, maybe we don't always choose the adventure we really want because we're scared of being foolish or the fool in choosing the adventure, because we know that there's a high chance we'll be fooled or we'll make mistakes, right?
Yeah.
And so I had this thought that maybe part of what helps someone be a good adventurer is feeling okay with being fooled or being foolish, and being Absolutely. Like, look, if I get fooled, this is what I'll do. This will be my response. I'll learn, I'll adapt, I'll change. But like, if you're too caught in your reputation and your image, I think that's actually going to stop you from ever going on an adventure.
Yeah.
Because you're going to care too much what people think of you. And like, the best, I'll just say this one last thing. The best part in my life, when I stepped into my own image of my dreams, was when I kind of got out of high school into college. And then I would even say just after college, because even in college, I was still caught in it a bit. But once I decided, you know what, I don't give a fuck what anyone thinks about me anymore. And then life became pretty fucking wildly incredible. And it was, I mean, I definitely made a fool of myself many times, but I didn't care. I wasn't caught in what people thought of me. And I think what I did find, I'm not saying I'm perfect with this because I still get caught in it every now and then. I'm like, ah, man, but I'm recognizing as we're talking about this, because something's kind of dropping for me, because I don't think I was really aware of this, but I realize now that my lack of concern of being considered foolish freed me. I realize now that when I get concerned about that, how limited it makes me.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, who am I trying to impress here? Like, what am I actually trying to do here?
Well, yeah, because it's like, it's clear that you're worried more about your image of yourself than you are about the actual thing that you're doing.
Yeah, that's what I'm realizing.
Yeah,
that's what I think we all get caught. Well, I do, but I mean, I suppose that we all do, but we get caught because we're worried more about how we appear than the actual thing that matters.
Yeah. I this seems like a good segue for this, but I pulled this up because when I realized that we were going to be talking a little bit about, like risks and responsibility and stuff like that, I pulled this up because this was an old blog post that I wrote, and that had to do with risk. It was called Take Risks and Be Interesting. And it was a rant. And so, if I may, I'm going to read some of this out. It's not the whole thing. It's just an excerpt of it. So I wrote, to make it short, I see so many actors who are so concerned with getting it right because to a large degree they have been indoctrinated into the view and approach that a quote-unquote right actually exists through the various methods and techniques that have been reinforced. The actor closes off and is incapable of attention and taking spontaneous action, which are the risky and interesting things great actors do. So if you want to take risks, act on those impulses that rise up. Don't ignore them. Those hunches, those intuitions about your character that move you, that excite you, that give you chills. When you allow yourself to act on those parts that aren't necessarily rational, you're daring to show who you really are, and that's the greatest risk of all. If you want to be interesting, pay real attention and really respond to what is going on. In Meisner training, you discover how fascinating it is when someone is actually absorbed in what's happening. Watching someone perform a seemingly mundane activity with sincere investment becomes a riveting spectacle. Really talk, really listen, really do what you're doing. You'll be so interested in what's happening, you won't have time to think about whether you're being interesting. But that's exactly what you will be. In this light, it occurs to me that this whole business of being genuinely interesting or risky is more of a byproduct as opposed to a premeditated action, something that may only be measured and weighed after the fact and utterly subjective. It means that as actors, we can simply focus on playing the moment at hand with full commitment and allow the rest to take care of itself.
Yeah, it's really good, man.
Thank you for obliging that. But it's like,
no, I
when I reread that, I was just like, oh, there's not to toot my own horn, but I'm like, oh, there's some good stuff in here. There's some.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's a sign that, a lot of us, including yourself, obviously, we're on to something. We're on to this shit. Like, we're not, like, this is what I love about these talks we have. I think that when you and I enter them, we're on to something. But we haven't fully investigated it, right? We haven't gone as deep as we can, but we're on to the wisdom. We're on to the insight. And so then we go, you know what? Like, this is coming up. Let's explore it. And then we get these new insights as we go into it and go, oh man, there's these ways of looking at this. And it's not like this is, and I think for our audience too, I imagine like a lot of our audience, they're like, yeah, I kind of know that. I kind of am aware of that. But then they join us because as we explore these ideas, we go into it and it's like, yeah, you know what? Maybe I understood it, but I didn't get this little nugget of it. And now that I do, it's helped me somehow. Like for me in this conversation, I can say personally that this whole thing about the fool has been a very tumultuous part of my journey. It's I found in my in the last several years, trying to not be the fool has been a big part of my narrative. And I'm beginning to realize through this conversation that how that might be limiting me and where I have judgments on myself when I'm fooled or when I feel I'm being the fool. And I think what I would walk away with just from what we discovered so far is that it's like, you know what, Brandon, give yourself a break. It's okay to be a fool. It's okay to be fooled every now and then. And you know what? You inevitably will be, because sometimes in some situations, someone's going to have more knowledge or more experience than you, and they're going to take advantage of it. And they're going to use your better self against you. They're going to use your trust. They're going to use this, and I one of the things that I've had a tough time navigating is like, sharing this with you, Evan, before we started the podcast, is like, can you trust anybody? Like that's a question I think we all ask, because if you get screwed over and people take advantage of you a number of times, you begin to ask that question, and then you can become jaded and you become like skeptical of everything, and you can become very reserved. And something we haven't talked about when it comes to risk taking, one of the greatest risks we'll ever take is trust. Just to trust somebody is a huge risk. And there's a quote, and I love this quote, and I don't know who said it. I don't know where it originated from, but I love it. It's not the stabbing in the back that hurts you. It's turning around to see who did it.
A2 Brute.
Yeah. And the thing is that as the fool gets stabbed in the back sometimes, and that's part of playing the fool when you trust. But, I think we have to make allowances for the potential that every now and then we're going to get betrayed. Every now and then someone's going to lie to us. Every now and then we're going to get manipulated, taken advantage of, and whatever else. And we just have to bounce back. We just have to rise up, learn, be smarter, be better. And, we need people that are wise and teach us how to be wise and encourage us to be wise with them, and somebody has to get stabbed in the back for us to understand what betrayal is. So somebody played that role for us, and in some cases it was me, in some cases it was someone else. But the thing is like, whenever anybody does that, they did us all a service because they learned something for us. And if they are so gracious to share it with us about what they learned from it, we should be thanking them. But we have to remember, we don't understand betrayal until betrayal has actually happened. Until then, it's just a theory. It's just an idea. It's just like, oh, that would really suck. But like, when you get at the grassroots, at the base of what betrayal really is like, and man, I mean, it's one of those things, right? So I think when we go about our adventure, there are things also, I mean, we could get into so many topics, I'm realizing, but we could talk about how betrayal plays into a part of adventure, right? And how sometimes we don't go on adventures because we're scared to be betrayed. But you have to somehow, if you want to go for things and you want to reach, sometimes you have to open yourself up to the potential of these. Not to say that they will happen, but that's part of what trust is. That's part of what all of this is, right?
Well, I think that in so many ways, that's always, in some ways, it's a part of the whole adventure. The idea of the adventure is, we're all, on any adventure that we go on, we're all bringing with us some kind of fear with us, and that can be different for each person, for each person, but it's part of it, because adventure always includes that element of facing the unknown, right? And as we're finding out in this conversation, is that end of being a fool, right? Like, it's guaranteed. Like, I think that's one of maybe the most important things that I'm coming away with in this conversation, is that it's like, look, it's guaranteed. Like, even in that, if you use that sort of metric of like, what's the most amount of responsibility that I can have here, and what's the most amount of risk that I can have here, it's like, no matter what, there's going to be you're going to confront some level of where you don't know what you're doing, where you feel like you don't know what you're doing, or you do something that was foolish, but that was always going to be, right? It was inevitable, but it's part of the adventure. It's part of what makes it an adventure. And also, again, the path of the fool is also the path of the wise one, right? It's a process. It's a process of going from fool to wisdom, right? Like it's all part of it. So choose your adventure, like it's like no matter what, because in a way,
like, can I stop you? The fool sets out on the adventure. I know I'm cutting you off, sorry, man, but the fool sets off on the adventure. The wise man arrives at the other end of it.
Yeah.
So like, don't be scared that you'll be exposed as a fool as you go on this adventure to your wise self.
Yeah. And then the wise one goes on another adventure to be made a fool of again.
To realize they're a fool all over again.
All over again, right? And hey, how much fun is that? And like maybe we can look at it that way, that it's like, like that's the adventure. That's the freaking adventure. We don't need to be so worried about it. We don't need to be so freaked out about the whole thing. I mean, look, I get it. I get part of, because we, particularly today, like we live in a world where you've got so many people who can so easily just troll you, and shit talk you and throw shade, and it's, but again, what's actually really getting, is actually getting hurt there? Some stranger talking shit about you. What's really getting damaged? And it's like, oh, it's just an image again, right? Like it's just an image of yourself that, honestly, who cares? Like what other people think about what you're doing. Go and make a fool of yourself. The trolls are nothing but people who are kind of, they're the ones who are afraid to make a fool of themselves, to put themselves out there and go on their adventure. But I was going to say that I think no matter what, like, you are choosing an adventure of some kind, because again, like, for someone who's avoiding risk, who's afraid of being made a fool, who's sticking too close to the ground, who's just constantly building their foundation, who's just nothing but building a foundation. And there's eventually a point where that's going to show them that their foolishness, right? And you hear people who have talked about this, like, oh, you know what? I wish I had, done these things in my life, but I was too afraid. I was too afraid to go out there. I was too afraid to take that risk. I was too afraid to make a fool of myself, and I never did it. And now I'm filled with regret. What a fool I was in trying to not be a fool, and so it's like, let's, I think, it's like, it's about embracing that aspect of it, and it makes stepping out on the adventure a little bit more palatable. It makes the fears and the risks not quite as daunting to face, I think.
Yeah, no, this is good. I think that there is foolishness in standing still or playing it too safe and all of that. And I think sometimes those are not as evident right away. And that's why people sometimes choose those choices, because the person who chooses to go on the adventure can more easily and predominantly be exposed as a fool in a moment where they did something and others perceive it, or they even may perceive it themselves as just, oh, that was stupid. Why did I do that? And I mean, I think something I'm reminded of too is we have to remember that all of us inside, no matter how old we are, no matter how much experience we may have, we're all still children on the inside. And I think it's very important that we treat ourselves to some degree at certain times, especially in relation to this, like the children we are underneath who are just learning. And, and it's like, would you tell a child who is trying something out for the very first time, like, oh, what an idiot, what a stupid thing to do? Like, you'd be a douche. Like, you'd be such a horrible person to do that, right? And if you would, like, you should check yourself, honestly. But like, the kid's just learning, so it's like, you know what I would do? I'd say, yeah, like, okay, no worries. Like, look, like, this is what happened. This is where you kind of made a mistake. No worries. Like, and I think responsibility comes in where it's like, that's where the parent side of us comes in to ourselves. Because I think in some ways, we're all parenting ourselves to some degree. And you need to be a parent and be like, yeah, you know what? This is too dangerous. Like, you could get hurt, and you're putting yourself in a position that's not okay, or you're doing something that is whatever. And I think we need to play that role as well. But I think we have to find compassion for ourselves and compassion for each other. A lot of what we talk about, Evan, seems to come down to that very thing, is like having compassion and having and not just for others, but for ourselves. Like, but I think it is through others that we find it through ourselves, because I think when we judge someone else, we're actually just judging ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So like, if you call someone else a fool, that's actually how you limit yourself. So when someone makes a mistake, instead of being judgmental of them, try to see their innocence in it, try to see their naivety in it, and look at it from their, maybe they had quite pure intention, and, I've seen people get taken advantage of, and, and sometimes it's like, I'm like, oh man, what a dumb thing to do. But I have to understand that they maybe didn't know something that maybe I thought I did. And, and they don't need someone kind of going like, oh, you're such an idiot. Like, not that I would say that, but like, in a way, my even thinking that, or even having any entertainment of that, means that on my own front, the way I look at myself, that's how I would be with me, because the way we judge others is really truly how we judge ourselves. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people who are very judgmental, what they do, the way they skirt this issue, is they never do anything where they could ever be judged, but they sit around and judge everyone else who's doing stuff. They're the arena people watching the fight. They're never in the fight, but they're always watching the fight, and they're going, oh, what a dumb move, what a bad thing. But they never enter the arena. And they
judge themselves for that more than anything.
Judge themselves as well for even that. But I think the thing is I believe that at some point in life, we should all step into the arena just so we can even take a beating, metaphorically, whatever that means. And just so we can learn how to have respect for people that actually decide to enter it. Because, it's so easy to just watch and observe and judge, but like, to enter, the arena of life, and to put up a battle, and to try to fight, to try to climb the mountain, if you like that as better analogy, it's like, we all got to give ourselves a chance to actually try. And I think showing ourselves grace and compassion, that we will stumble and fall and make mistakes and scrape our knee and whatever. But here's an analogy. Let me just leave it with this on this point. If someone said, Brandon, I'm going to go climb that mountain, and I go, awesome, go ahead. And they go climb it, and then they come back down. They're all bloodied and bruised, and they never got to the top. And they say, I know I didn't make it. This is where I made it. This is what happened. I realized that I don't have the right gear. I realized this is what I need to learn. I realized whatever. And it'd be like, great, go get it, climb it again if you want. I wouldn't say like, what an idiot, told you so, didn't make it.
Yeah.
What a terrible way. But I feel like that's how judgment works. Judgment's like, oh, you didn't make it up the mountain. See, I told you, what a stupid risk you took. What a dumb idea. Such an idiot. You're such a fool, right? Like, and I feel like these narratives, these types of talks, granted, I don't know if they quite work like that for me, but they work in some way like that for me. So I assume that other people have somewhat similar. I'm just throwing that out there. But I feel like if we look at ourselves, like if you fail to climb the mountain that you're trying to climb and you come back down and face the part of you that judges that you can get that part that judges you to show compassion and empathy, you're going to be more likely to get more prepared and climb that mountain again and actually reach the top, or climb another mountain, but be more prepared for the next mountain you climb, whatever that means, you know?
Yeah. Well,
all right, wrap it up.
let's wrap it up. I don't have a beer. I was just drinking coffee because I wasn't quite feeling ready for a beer. So, but I believe you've got one. So why don't you?
I do.
Why don't you share with us what you've got going there?
I do. All right. So this is called the Filthy Dirty IPA by
Parallel 49.
Yeah, India Pale Ale. 7.2% alcohol. Yeah. Man, that's a
saucy mother right there.
It is. This is a really, really tasty beer. I haven't had 49 Parallel for a little while because I've been kind of out of the city, been exploring, but I actually might do I got one of their, I think it's one of their summer or spring kind of kits. So I might just embrace the 49 Parallel for a month.
Nice.
But I got to tell you, this beer, I haven't had it in a long time, and it is delicious. Like, knocked it out of the park. Really good. Yeah, man, it's like,
yeah,
they did a good job.
It's definitely one of their flagships. They've got that one dialed in, and they keep pumping it out.
Yeah, it's good. It's solid. Well, I don't know. Do you have a final thoughts? Do you want me to wrap it up first?
I guess I'll go ahead. I don't think I have necessarily anything new to add for final comments, but yeah, like I'll come back again to that thing that you said earlier, which is just, what's the most amount of responsibility and the most amount of risk that I can take and have with, whatever sort of situation that you are in. I think that's a terrific way of looking at it. Like, just again, you put some attention on something and you'll start to actually figure that stuff out. You'll start to like, okay, well, I guess I can do this and I can do this and I can do this. And then that means that, no matter what, this will be okay. This will all be sorted. I won't be completely fucked if this thing doesn't work. And then from there you can like, okay, and now I can really fully commit into the amount of risk that I can put out, the most amount of risk that I can put out. That creating that space for both of those things, again, that they're not mutually exclusive. They're partners, just like the fool and the wise are they're part of they're the same person. They're the same person, but the wise person has left room to be the fool, and in many ways embraces the fool, because they know that the fool is part of them becoming wise.
Mm-hmm.
And that, it's always just a new adventure in that. Everything is an adventure from being a fool to being wise. And I mean, if you could look at any book ever written, any movie ever made, and you could probably see that theme running in almost every single story that you've ever seen or read, is a story of somebody who went into something they were a bit foolish and they came out of it wise or wiser.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I would dare you to just apply it to any story, and you'd be like, oh shit, that's there. Mm-hmm. That's there. Any good story, that is there. And that's part of the adventure. So let yourself be a fool. Take the acting wisdom of of like, don't be afraid to make yourself a fool, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to do this well.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only way that you're going to be able to do your life well is by being a bit of a fool. So be a fool. Be a fool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say my big takeaway was a lot of what you said. Like, number one, I'll reiterate that it's how much responsibility and risk can I take both at the same time, not one or the other. And I think that's a lot of how I'm going to look at things moving forward, because I think that gives you kind of a good gauge at what you're doing. This whole idea about the fool was another thing that came up, and I think that's been interesting to explore, because for me, I'm recognizing that it's like, okay, where are you maybe risking doing something foolish, and are you willing to explore that to maybe learn, and how much are you willing to learn that lesson? Because like, if I said, look, I can give you a course for $100 to learn to be the fool, or I could give you a course that's $10,000 to learn to be the fool, they teach the same thing. Well, you'd probably want the $100 course. But if I said the 10,000 course will teach you something that will be life profound changing, which will open up your world in a way that is unrecognizable, and the $100 course will just teach you like a little piddly lesson, it's a cool lesson, but it's priced accordingly. You would probably go, okay, well, $10,000 is a big fucking risk, but life-changing, profound, eye-opening, enlightening, maybe, right? Like, okay, so maybe I do that, right? And so I feel like when we're going into something, I think, like, I love how you kind of sent people off saying like, yeah, play the fool. Let me just kind of play the opposite. Don't be delusional. Don't do things mindlessly, carelessly. Do them sincerely. Sometimes you're not going to have all the info, but don't just go into it blindly. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's a part of this is like, yes, you should embrace playing the fool, but it doesn't mean you should be dumb and delusional about playing the fool, because like, I'm walking away a little motivated to play the fool, but at the same time, I feel like there's this voice of reason in the back of my mind going, yeah, like, play the fool, Brandon, and don't judge yourself so hard on it. But at the same time, be a little responsible too. Like, don't just like, just do things in a dumb way. Like, if you could ask somebody for some help or some advice, or if you could research something a little bit extra, or just find out a little bit more before you take that jump, then maybe it's worth it. There maybe is a little bit of wisdom in look before you leap. But at the same time, if you're looking for forever and you're never leaping, sometimes you just got to go, okay, like, look, enough is enough. Let's just go for it. And I think it comes back to this main point of this conversation, which I really think somehow it just was said early on, which is, yeah, how much responsibility and risk can I take at the exact same time to do whatever it is I'm about to do? Choose your own adventure.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.